host of Eat My Globe, things you didn't know about food. And on today's very special episode, I'm going to be doubly blessed, talking to one of my favourite people about one of my favourite subjects. Paula J. Johnson is the curator and project director of the American Food History Project at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. She has been a very good friend to me as I have spent time at the museum signing my books, presenting panels, and getting to know her wonderful team. Now, Paula is also one of the curators who was directly responsible for bringing the kitchen of my next favourite subject back to the museum. The kitchen belongs, obviously, to the one and only Julia Child and has pride of place at this wonderful museum. And it is that kitchen, bringing it to Washington, D.C., and Paula's role in that we shall be talking about today. So, may I present Paula J. Johnson, and she'll be discussing her most amazing book, and it really is, because I have it here, and I always have it by the side of my bed. Julia Child's Kitchen, the design, tools, stories, and legacy of an iconic space, published by Abram Books. So, Paula, before I do anything else, I wanted to say a huge thank you for appearing on my show. I know just how busy you are because I've been there, and I appreciate you taking time for this. So, first of all, thank you for coming along.
Thank you so much for having me, Simon. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today.
Oh, well, you know, we've done nearly 100 episodes. Well, no, we've done over 100 episodes of and it's been too long for me to get one of you in. So thank you. So tell us, before we go on to talk about the kitchen and everything around that, tell us what you've got going on.
Yes, well, honestly, Simon, I've been giving a lot of talks about the book, and in fact, I'll be part of a cooking class here in Washington, D.C. on Sunday, Skillet Cooking School, and the program's called Braising with Julia, a culinary tribute to Julia Child's kitchen. Oh. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's a little bit different than most of the talks I give. I'll be right there in the kitchen with the students. And then I'm also continuing, of course, to do the work of a museum curator, conducting research, collecting objects, and planning and presenting different kinds of public programs. And we have a great one coming up on April 24th, focusing on the much beloved Italian-American cookbook author, chef, and teacher, Marcella Hazan.
Oh, of course.
Collected material from of her Italian heritage from her family, and it's going to be very exciting.
Now, I know that a lot of the listeners to this, and me included, want to have your job because it sounds so spectacular. And it is. I know when we've been there, it's a fantastic job to have. So again, I want to thank you for spending time to come on to this. But let's go on to the kitchen because I'm so excited about this. I really am. I want to tell you that you had one of the other heroes of mine, and he was a guest on this show, Jacques Pepin, as the writer of your book's introduction. I'm guessing he was happy to do it, but I'm reading about it that he had an amazing time in Julia's kitchen. This is up in Massachusetts. He does call it a place of happiness. And didn't he actually cook her final meal in that kitchen?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Jacques Pepin is marvelous and so generous. I'm forever grateful to him for writing the foreword to the book. And of course, he's somebody that spent a lot of time with Julia in that kitchen, and particularly in the last television series that was recorded in the kitchen, Julia and Jacques Cooking at Home. So we all kind of watched the two of them in their ways of cooking the same dish, in different manners, with different techniques, different kind of preferences. And, just wishing we could be in that kitchen too, watching the two of them. But He was so generous also with telling me about all of the times he cooked with Julia when they were becoming who they became, when they were building their culinary careers. And they really did have this wonderful close relationship, lots of cooking, lots of sharing meals in that kitchen. And some of those stories are in the book, which I, of course, loved hearing about and collecting. And you're right. The last meal cooked in the kitchen was Jacques Pepin and students from the Boston University gastronomy department.
Oh.
And just before Julia was leaving to move back to her home state of California, they came into her house and cooked a marvelous meal and enjoyed it together and toasted Julia on her way to California.
Oh, that sounds like just the most excellent dinner to be at.
Yeah, I would like to be there too.
Oh, dear. But tell me how you got involved in bringing Julia's Kitchen to the Smithsonian. So, I mean, first of all, how did you know Julia? Because I never met her.
Sure. As a curator at the Smithsonian's American History Museum, I was part of the team that was really looking to expand our holdings of material reflecting American food history, particularly in the 20th century. And so when we heard that Julia was leaving her home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to return to her home state of California, we decided to give her a call and just ask her if we might come and have a little chat about her kitchen and about her plans. We were thinking we would do an interview with her in the kitchen and, ask her about certain things. And perhaps, we might ask her to donate a few objects that would be added to the national collections. They would then be available for research and programs and exhibitions. And we were thinking, some balloon whisks, maybe, some copper. We were just kind of tossing out ideas. But, my colleague, Raina Green, actually made the call, and Julia was so welcoming. She says, "Come ahead." So she invited us, come to Cambridge.
You really give her accent. That was proper.
And so that's how I met Julia, was walking into her kitchen, and for my first time. And she was standing there, greeting us, because that's how she greeted people who came to visit her, in her kitchen. You'd come in the back door, up a few stairs, take a right, and there she'd be, welcoming you into her favorite place in the house. And she was as genuine as she is on television. She was so enthusiastic and warm and welcoming, come ahead and let's talk. And so the story of actually collecting the kitchen and putting it on display in the museum is indeed a major part of the book. And it's one of those fun behind the scenes at the Smithsonian stories that, I love to tell.
Well, I know we're going to get onto that a little bit later. And in fact, let's talk about you and the book first, because it is such a fantastic book. It just is. But first thing I want to talk about is not Julia Charles. I want to talk to you about Paul Charles. First of all, and I love doing, he's a label maker. And I always remember that he had this thing, beware onion skins. And I always remember that because this is something I kind of always observe when I'm doing my, what's it called? My, when I use my own disposal, shall we say. So I was very pleased to see it. But can you tell our listeners about that and about him? Because he also took lots of pictures of, and so I think they were very much a team, weren't they? And even though people don't recognize him as much, they were a team. And it's like me and Sybil, or we're a team.
Right. Thank you for asking about Paul Child, because not enough people do. He was so important to Julia and her career, but he was in and of himself, he was a very accomplished individual, an artist, a poet, a writer, and so much more. And the kitchen indeed has signs and labels all over it. And that was largely because there were so many people cooking with Julia in the kitchen over so many years, either testing recipes or cooking together for an event or something like that. And so he put labels up all over the place, and they're on masking tape. They're on those Dymo labels, those plastic labels, on paper, various media. And they are really signposts, guideposts for people. And people who did cook in that kitchen with her really appreciated all of the instructions, how to make the coffee in this particular coffee maker, that kind of thing. So you mentioned the garbage disposal, which I love this too. Right near the switch by the sink, there are these Dymo labels, and it says something like, to avoid catastrophes with getting things jammed up in the disposal. And it was no grease, no fat, no artichoke leaves, no husks, and beware onion skins. And again, it's not just the instructions, but it's the funny way that the beware onion skins sounds. It just indicates a person who not only has a lot of rules, but also a great sense of humor.
Yeah, and that's what came out when I went to see this, and, when we were signing up books in front of that, and I remember, what I also didn't think then, but of course this was for all the people that were coming in rather than anyone else, in that home, as it were.
Indeed. And in fact, famously on the wall of copper, he had outlined everything on the pegboard behind where each pot was supposed to go. Red for copper and black for cast iron. And there's a photograph in the book of we took everything off of that pegboard, and you could still see Paul Child's red marks and black marks, for lest there be any doubt where a pan had to be returned to after it had been used. And again, I just love that. But you were asking about them as a team, and that is such an important point that I want to be sure to say something about it. Julia, in fact, said there would be no French chef without him. And she was referring, of course, to her first television series. And, what I've learned in doing this book is just how key he was to helping her figure out how to do cooking on TV. They practiced together and everything. It was a true partnership. And they, even before the television series, he helped her with the illustrations in her cookbooks. Mastering the Art of French Cooking with those line drawings it was just amazing for people to sort of see from the chef's point of view what their hands were supposed to be doing, what the tool was supposed to be doing. And he did that by basically standing behind her, over her shoulder, with a large format camera and taking these photographs of her hands and the tools, whether it was kneading dough or slicing vegetables or slashing the gluten cloak of a baguette. It was, this is what they did. And then the photographs were rendered in pen and ink by an artist, so they were very, very clear. Again, it's a hallmark of their cookbooks, and the fact that they worked so closely together to make that aesthetic dimension of the cookbook happen is something, again, that really reflects their teamwork, their shared vision, and how they were able to pull it off. Yeah.
I love that. And I was going to ask you that, Julia used this kitchen, the one now at Smithsonian, for her preparations for the first appearance on television.
Mhm.
And I remember reading in your book that the cameramen said they had never seen a show so thoroughly prepared before. So that's obviously Paul Child's love of it, but it was also her love of it. So
Mhm.
tell me what the cameramen were thinking, and and then what she came out to do, because that's again, I do a lot of television programs, and now it's not it's not easy, but we know what we're doing. But this is almost not the first, because we have there were a few people before that, but this was very different, I think.
It was very different, and there is a literature on cooking on television before the 1950s, and even in the 1950s, there were a lot of shows that were mainly, home economists, people who were giving advice about healthy food, cooking, and household techniques. James Beard, of course, was on television in the 1950s, very briefly. But the thing about Julia and Paul is that they decided that these complicated French recipes, how to do that in 27 minutes, doing it while talking, that is something that's requires a lot of pre-planning. And so they sat down together and scoped out all of the steps that they wanted to show, the key techniques, the key ingredients, what she was going to say about all of that. And so they did this. There wasn't a template for them to follow to do that. They figured it out themselves. And so the producers and the cameramen were kind of, wow, this is amazing that they've thought of all of these angles in advance. And of course, it was a little rough at first. She was not practiced and, apparently rushed through one of the shows and had like 9 minutes left and had to fill it up. The other thing to remember here is that these were taped in one take. They did not have a lot of money at GBH or, public television.
Yeah.
And so they were conserving resources and had to basically do it in one take. And they learned, and in fact, Julia and Paul brought in an electric stove into the kitchen. They took out the table, brought in the stove temporarily so she could get used to cooking on electricity, and also to, rationalize the steps. And that was something, again, that really helped her succeed very quickly in the television sphere. And it was due to their true partnership at that time.
I just love that. I was talking to someone the other day, and he was saying, did she make a lot of mistakes while she was cooking? And did she? And was that part of what made her so popular? That she made, and the reason I mention that is we had a cook in Britain called Fanny Craddock, and she used to make, and she was always just in a ball gown, and she'd cook at the Royal Albert Hall or something, and she was fantastic. But the fact that people loved her because of the mistakes she made. And did Julia Child make mistakes as well, or was that, something that she just did,
Well, A, everybody makes mistakes, but B, cooking, things happen.
Yeah.
Things happen in the kitchen and you're doing everything right. And, something doesn't quite work out right, or, a tool isn't at your hand when you need it most. So, things happened. And, I sort of shy away from saying, yes, she made a mistake. But things happened and she recovered. I mean, the whole point of teaching, she was a teacher and at heart, and she wanted to help people, cook on their own. And so things would happen and she would adjust. She would admit if I forgot to put this here. fine, move on. But she also famously said, never apologize in the kitchen, just keep going. And I think that spirit of I'm demonstrating this. We're learning this together. We're having an adventure. That some of that was, I think, really resonated with viewers. That if she is there trying this, doing this, that happened to her, she kept going. I can do that too, you know?
Yeah, and that's why I believe she became such a big star, because she's doing French dishes, which often scared everyone, but she did it with them, and I love that. Oh, so I can imagine that being asked to Julia's kitchen for a meal was going to be rather fun, but a rather frightening experience because she was such a good cook. Is it true, do you think? Or she did call it the soul of the house, didn't she? And I love that as well.
Yeah, she called it the beating heart and also the soul of the house, for sure. And being invited to a meal there, the book contains some wonderful stories by people who were invited. And of course, were a bit intimidated until they arrived and were greeted by Julia, who loved to have people, over to enjoy food and conversation around the table. For Julia, the kitchen was also the social center of the household. She said, the reason she wanted to have a nice kitchen where people felt comfortable is she was like a sheepdog. She wanted to be in the middle of everything, didn't want to be, banished to a kitchen and not be able to be part of a conversation. So that's why she invited people and preferred to have them in her kitchen as opposed to having a meal in her formal dining room. So one of my favorite stories about being invited to Julia's home for a meal is actually from a friend who lived in Julia's home for almost a year. Julia and Paul traveled often and lived for months at a time at their home in Provence, La Pichoune. They often had tenants stay in the Cambridge house while they were on these extended travels. And my friend Sherrod and her husband-to-be, Alan, they were being vetted for the opportunity to live there. So Julian invited them over for lunch, kind of for the final interview. And, being graduate students, they were like imagining some sort of, just, wow, we're going to have such an experience of elevated fare. But they arrived to find that Julia was standing at the stove cooking one big hamburger in a skillet. And, she was just there cooking it. She added some wine. She expertly flipped it and then served it in wedges like you would, cut a pie.
Yeah.
And then on the side, in addition to the wedge, was a handful of corn chips. So that was lunch. And, while they were surprised, Sherrod added, when she was telling me the story, that it was the most delicious hamburger she had ever eaten. It was transformational. So, that's just to say that, Julia cooked all kinds of things and was not always making complicated French dishes. She was an American after all.
I love that. And again, just something to ask, which wasn't on there. Do you think you could tell us any of the people who came to visit her? Who came to visit her in there? Some, did she have stars? Did she have, or just anyone?
Well, she would, she had a lot of people working with her on various projects. She was so busy. She was doing talks and demonstrations. She was doing book talks and book tours. She was doing demonstrations in various department stores and whatnot. She was doing Good Morning America. She was writing books and testing recipes. So she had a lot of people. And some of my favorite little snapshots in the book are of, the folks like Sarah Moulton, who were on the staff, so to speak, and cooking with her in the kitchen. And so there was that group, but also, her family. Phyla, her niece, was a student at Radcliffe and would come to have lunch sometimes, dinner. Her grandnephew, Alex Prudhomme, the writer, he would come and bring with family. And then she would sometimes invite chefs over, sometimes invite, local people in the food space over. There was one hilarious anecdote that Alex told about. He was there with his fiance, and there were a couple chefs. There was the inventor of a cookie, a certain cookie. And then there was a woman that Julia had met that day at the gas station. They were filling up the cars. And she said, "Oh, come, have dinner." And so here it was, this interesting group of people. And, Julia, this was her, her firm belief that eating and cooking are social activities. And that played out in the kitchen.
I love that. So I absolutely do. And the other thing that I really, really love is that she's got this collection, and you've talked about it earlier, of copper pans and cast iron and other items. So I think, if I haven't read this incorrectly, she described herself as a gadget freak. And I'd love to know about that, because often the gadgets that she has were like the first they'd ever been, like the microwave, these were the first time everyone had seen them. So I know they're not in the museum, the ones that you have there, but you have similar. And so I'd love to know how she used these, because I would have thought a microwave for her would have been like something a bit terrible. But any equipment.
Well, so I'll start with the microwave. The one that's in the book is actually in the Smithsonian collection. It's a 1955 microwave, the first design for home use. But it was huge. It was enormous, and it cost a lot of money, over $1,200.
Oh my God.
It was made to look exactly like a regular oven, because the thought was, this will replace your regular oven. So there are these knobs and things. There's also, hilariously, a recipe drawer in the housing. Just under the door, there's a little drawer. You open it up, and there are recipes for how to make Thanksgiving dinner in your microwave. This was 1955, yeah. So we use that as an example of an early microwave. But Julia had them. She tested. She tried it. She was an early adopter, and this was all, I think, in service to her role as a teacher. And she wanted to have the knowledge. She wanted the authority. I'm going to try this. I'm going to tell you about it. And so she did try things all the time. And with the microwave, she made a couple. There was a mistake. She tried to make a whole meal in the microwave at the same time, according to Alex Prudhomme. But also she tried to dry off the Boston Globe that had gotten wet in the driveway, put it in the microwave, turned it on, and of course a fire ensued. So yeah, but she tried it, and she decided that she would keep a microwave. Actually, it was in her pastry pantry, and she used it for melting butter, melting something, warming something up, and warming up a cup of tea, that kind of thing. We did not collect the contents of the pastry pantry, and that's why we did not collect her microwave. But yeah, she, to get back to your comment about being a gadget freak, she said she was a gadget freak and a knife freak, and was very proud of it.
Yeah, tell me about her knives, because I collect, as people in the chef world, we collect many knives.
Yes.
And, people send them to me, and I love them, and then I'll go and use the next knife when that comes. And, it's all great. So, she must get, or she must have had many, many, many knives being sent to her.
Many, 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 many knives. And she also bought them herself. She would, wherever she was, she would stop in to the local kitchenware store or the, cookware, and she would look and, purchase. And we have a couple of really interesting invoices, copies of the invoices in the book that show just what she was buying in the 1970s, I guess it was. But as far as knives, she was always interested in learning more about what was available. And she felt this was research that would, again, help her communicate more knowledgeable with the home cooks and fans. We have pictures of knives in the book. It takes up 3 pages. But my favorite knife story is the one that she told about how she acquired her Japanese Jinsu knives in her kitchen. She was actually on a plane seated next to a Jinsu knife salesman. And as they were chatting, he took out his carry-on case that was filled with knives. Yeah. And he gave her a knife to examine, and they talked about it. And that was that. He let her keep it. So this story is really such an artifact from the 20th century.
Yeah, really, it really is.
It's a time when a knife salesman could board a flight carrying his wares and bring them out actually during the flight and, brandish them in some way. It was obviously pre 2001.
I'm sure.
But I don't remember, what the exact date was. She told us that story. She also had what she called her fright knife. And this was just a huge, oversized, ridiculously large, almost like a prop. And in fact, she kind of used it as a prop. She, being a good teacher, knew the value of props and humor in getting a message across. And the fright knife was, terrific for showing how to, behead a particular large fish, that kind of thing. So the fright knife, yes, was also there in the kitchen.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. She just seems like, and we didn't know about her too much in the United Kingdom. We didn't. We had our own chefs, but when they started showing her and Jacques Pepin together on this show, and it used to happen in the early afternoon. So whenever I was, not going to school, that's when they would show it. And I would always put it on, and and her and Jacques Pepin would come on and do stuff. And that's when I first got to know her. But it was very interesting to see her because she was totally different to anyone in the UK right then. And it was fantastic. And I love this because I have, and if you could see all my kitchens and the books and she had plenty of books in her kitchen, didn't she? And they weren't all cookery books. No. They were like all kinds of things. I've got here everything from the Massachusetts State Handbook to Bullfinch's Mythology to The Joy of Cooking. So all of these books seem to have plenty of use when you saw them. I mean, plenty. So, was she a great reader?
Oh, absolutely. She and Paul were both voracious readers. And, what you've described just is more proof that the kitchen was a very versatile room in their house. They spent a lot of time there. And so they had other kinds of books, not just cookbooks. One of the details from the book that I treasure was learning that in the first years of having set up the kitchen and, having this life at 103 Irving Street, Paul would actually read to Julia in the kitchen as she was cooking of an evening. And, I learned this because I was looking through his correspondence with his twin brother, Charles. And he remarked on, here's what I'm reading to Julia. And I just, to me, that was just this wonderful little window into, again, how close they were and, how important the kitchen was.
I absolutely love it. Yes, I know. That makes me feel really, really good.
But They had various libraries in the house. Julia had an extensive food and cookbook collection in her upstairs office. But we only collected the books that were in the bookshelf in the main kitchen. And as you saw, they were well used and stained for
Very
sure.
well used.
But she had multiple copies of The Joy of Cooking, which she called Mrs. Joy, as well as kitchen copies of her own cookbooks. There were books on wine, maps of France, reference works on how to clean everything or how things work in case she had to repair something. And just a quick note. What's kind of cool when I show visitors the kitchen sometimes is that I point out, well, there are phone books and yellow pages on the kitchen shelf. And of course, young people, they're like, what's yellow pages? And I have to explain it, prior to the internet, we all had these big things. And they find it kind of hilarious. And then I show them the VHS tapes, which are on the bottom shelf of her kitchen bookshelf. Like, what's that? And I'm like, well, she had those tapes of her cooking shows and a little TV on a rolly cart that she had just pushed into the food pantry just off the main kitchen. She'd wheel that TV in and put a tape in and, critique her performance or watch the news on television. I mean, that's, again, how the kitchen functioned in her real life.
I love that. That's so good. I mean, for me, I always put a podcast on or a book. I always put a book on while I'm cooking, and that's, and so everyone has these kind of things that they're trying to do when they're cooking. I think that's the most important thing. The first thing is, I know Nancy Silverton well. I do Tournament of Champions with her. She's fantastic. But Nancy gave this thing. She said Julia Child was encouraging and mentoring and learning. And this is when she was 81. She was still learning. And I think that's, for me, that's the thing that anyone's got to do when they're cooking. If you stop and just do all the food that you already did, you're not learning. And I always am trying to learn. I travel around the world. We've been to how many countries around the world. And so I'm always learning. And so at 81, though, you're thinking, was that just because of her?
Well, Julia was a lifelong learner and very proud of it. And I think it was part of her identity as a lifelong teacher. Teaching and learning are really two sides of knowledge, and she was very much involved in both. Her curiosity seemed absolutely boundless, and I think that translated really beautifully on camera when she stood by her guest chefs like Nancy Silverton, like Jacques Pepin, like Rick Bayless. During the programs that were filmed in her home kitchen, all of which were done in the 1990s, she was not only generous by welcoming people into the kitchen, but standing to the side to make sure that they were the star and that they were really able to demonstrate to Julia's audience and to Julia herself how to do the particular recipe, the particular technique that they valued, that they wanted to demonstrate. And so, she was I think that's just such a lovely part of who she was, that she really welcomed people and genuinely wanted to learn from them, whether it was, a particular technique or it was a particular cultural tradition that she wasn't familiar with. So, a lifelong learner. That was Julia.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Now, I was going to ask you, and this sounds a bit stalkerish, but there you go. You have her telephone in the kitchen. And I think next to it you have a list of numbers that she called, and I wanted to know who was on it because you can imagine Julia Child it must have everybody, but I don't know if she had the plumber and then chefs and all of that in one little notebook or whatever.
Okay, Simon, I will tell you this.
Yes, yes.
On the speed dial, on the phone itself, here were the speed dial numbers. Rosie Manel. Rosie was an artist, a food stylist, a friend, helped Julia in the kitchen a lot, and was also very much involved with The Way to Cook, one of Julia's really masterpiece cookbooks. Rosie also painted the picture of 3 cats and asparagus, which hangs on the wall in Julia's kitchen and is much beloved, much admired by visitors, and of course, me as well. So Rosie Manel, the AIWF, which was the organization founded with Robert Mondavi and Dick Graff. So she had the AIWF on there. Jeff Drummond, who was her producer of the cooking shows in the 1990s for a la carte productions. He was on it. And then in big caps, Limo, her limousine service. And then Stephanie Hirsch, her longtime assistant, was there. Her hairdresser was on it. Of course, Phyla, her niece, Phyla Cousins, her niece. The Yellow Cab Company, and then the Market H&B. So that was the speed dial. The little black book is another thing entirely. It's thick. And so that's a different story altogether. But that's a speed dial.
Wow. And it's such a mix.
It is.
Okay, well, that's good enough for me. Thank you. But now, perhaps you can tell us a bit about bringing the kitchen to Smithsonian, to the museum, because this is something that for me, I think it's almost, I always say it's like Tutankhamun. You bring that, it is. And when I went to see it, and the first time I saw it, I'm staring at it and going, Julia Child was in this kitchen. And that's, for me, it's everything. Tell me how the decision to have the kitchen moved all the way from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to the museum happened. Was this something that, Julia thought of and she wanted it to be? Was it something that you thought of? Was it, a mixture of the two?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Thank you, Simon, for equating Julia's kitchen to Tutankhamun, the experience of.
Yes, and I've seen both.
Yes,
so I know.
It was a big deal, and I've tried to do justice to the story in the book in a condensed version here. Once Julia decided to donate the kitchen, we completed an inventory of everything in that one room and took a lot of photographs. We conducted an interview with her, and then after she departed for California, we sent team number 1, the Dishpan Hands crew, up to Cambridge to pack the small items, meaning everything in the drawers, inside the cabinets, hanging on the walls, and such. And dishpan hands just means that we ran things through the dishwasher just to make sure there weren't any residual oils or anything on it. Then the second crew went up several weeks later. They went up to remove and pack the cabinetry, architectural elements, major appliances like the big 6-burner Garland range, as well as her furniture, the beautiful Norwegian wooden table and chairs. So everything, of course, in both teams had to be numbered and tagged so that it could be correctly placed when the kitchen was reassembled at the museum. And it took some 55 crates and boxes to send it all to Washington, where we set ourselves up in a gallery that had a curved wall of windows. And that allowed museum visitors to come and just look at what we were doing as we were unpacking things. We'd unpack things, but then we have to photograph them, measure them, catalog them. We had conservators come in and take a look at everything to see if they were stable or to recommend any kinds of treatments. And it was amazing to see how interested people were in not only seeing Julia's wonderful balloon whisks and, things coming out of boxes,
Yeah.
but also kind of the care with which we were, doing this work on over 1,000 objects, individual objects.
And that's why I want to say that it was, for me anyway, as fascinating, just as fascinating, as it, when I went to see, Carter's Tutankhamun, because, there's something so special. But let's talk about it now. So I know that, let's talk about Jacques Pepin again, because he once said, I love this though, but he said, frankly, for me, when I went to the Smithsonian and I just saw this through a window, I mean, it was a little bit freakish for him, he said. Do you think that other Smithsonians have the same reaction when viewing the kitchen? So how do you try and make it a real kitchen? Because when I saw it, I hadn't seen it before, and I thought it was a real kitchen. I thought it was it was fantastic, and it was well placed in front of the rest of the museum. And I absolutely loved it. But someone who'd been there, I don't know how they'd think.
Yeah, I think, and you've really put your finger on something that, museums grapple with, which is that visitors are very different from the other. And, you bring yourself to the museum. What you see because of who you are, and you might interpret it a little bit differently. Jacques did have an emotional reaction, and I can totally understand it. There are a few snapshots in the book showing informal meals in the kitchen, and Jacques is there with his wife, with Martin Yan, with Julia and Paul, and he had a very intimate connection with that place that few others, aside from family, probably ever had. But at the same time, I've seen others who worked with Julia in the kitchen have very strong, very positive reactions as well. In a way that they really appreciated having that sort of emblematic space preserved and available to everyone. Museum visitors who, don't have that kind of intimacy with the kitchen, they will come and gaze into the space. And, it brings back memories that they might have of, their own cooking experiences or watching Julia on television. And, they imagine things like, I just love to be, I have heard this. I would love to be sitting there having a cup of tea with Julia.
Oh, yeah.
People do that.
I was thinking the same.
I know, me too. So, the other thing is that luckily in the gallery, just behind the kitchen, we have a 90-minute loop of clips, Julia's cooking shows from over the years. And this was put together by Jeff Drummond of A La Carte Productions, and we are so grateful to have it because it infuses the gallery with her voice and that distinctive voice that people, you just hear it on television, it sticks with you. And so her voice is there. It does enliven the space, as does the kinetic energy or the colors and the movement that you see in the clips while they're playing. So, people have very different responses. And for so many people who, have, not even a lot of experience with Julia, the room itself is so layered with things and is so suggestive to people about a room in the house for cooking and eating and being together that I think it really works.
That's great for me. But what I wanted to ask as well, though, is at what point in time, because Julia was such a vibrant character, will she just go into history? Do you know what I mean? Because there's a lot of people now who remember her and spend time with her, watching her on television, but is that going to change if we go and the Smithsonian will still be there 100 years time, or and will it just be a museum piece then? And I get really worried about that because she was so vibrant.
Yes, I see your point, but I think that, again, people bring something with them. And, and you're even part of this when you look at how popular food television is and how everybody has their favorite people on food television. I mean, we all do. And, that food television is a thing that people bring with them now as a frame of reference when they're looking at the food exhibition and Julia's Kitchen. And so I think that making sure that people understand this, is a place that relates to the thing that you like watching on television. In the same way that if you like to cook, there's so many things in the kitchen that really, again, catch your eye and bring you into, thinking about perhaps your own experiences. The other part of this is that when we collected the kitchen, I think Julia was really happy that it was coming to an educational institution like the Smithsonian. Because this is a way for her message about cooking, caring about eating and together, and caring about ingredients and caring about food, that this is a way for that message to continue to more generations of people. So, I see your point, but I'm on the optimistic side of the spectrum.
That's good. I'm on the same, but I just wanted to ask that question. So one more question about the kitchen, and then some other questions that I need to kind of clear up with you as well.
Okay.
But the kitchen, can I just ask you, is it hermetically sealed? I don't know this answer, but people kind of go, well, it is, and I don't know.
Okay, the answer is no.
Okay.
It has a ceiling and it has viewports. The viewports correspond to the actual doorways in the kitchen, so we didn't cut any doorways. And they are made of sturdy acrylic, but there are gaps around the top of the viewports to let some air circulate. So there is some air that circulates, but we do have to, of course, go in and just make sure everything is tidy and clean. Yeah. With all of that, the dust and stuff is minimal, but we do tend.
I'm glad to hear that. It was I just had this thing that people told me about the kitchen there, and I was just like, I don't think that's right. But anyway, okay, so. What I do want to ask you, though, from signing my own book, I'm sitting, which was great, and I really thank you for that. I know how special it was, but what it does lead, that beautiful kitchen, it does lead you into the other areas, and so you had the bottle of Chateau Montelino, which I just thought was fantastic, and you had the original Tupperware and all of this. But is it too unfair to ask you what you love about that, or is everything just going to be,
Oh, Simon, I love it all. I love the things and the stories. I can't never get enough. But I too love the story of the Judgment of Paris, the Chateau Montelena 1973 Chardonnay. And also,
should we tell people what that is, though? Would you? Because I'm not sure that a lot of them would understand or know about that.
Sure. The Judgment of Paris, held in 1976. It was basically a contest, tasting between the upstart California vintners and the best of Burgundy and Bordeaux. And this was put together by a British wine merchant who had a shop in Paris. And it was kind of a bicentennial. 1976 was the American bicentennial. So it was just a way of kind of calling attention to, what had been happening in the American wine industry. So this was a blind tasting. All of the judges were French experts. And, there was one journalist there, but it wasn't, a huge deal. But the wine was poured first, the whites, and the 73 Chateau Montelena Chardonnay, made by Mike Gergich in Napa Valley, won first. And people were like, what? And but then they moved on to the reds. And the 1973 Stag's Leap Wine Cellars Cabernet Sauvignon, made by Warren Winiarski, placed first above all the best of Bordeaux. And this was seen as this moment when this attention was fixated on how great the American wines had become, especially California. And it's seen as a watershed where the wine growing in different parts of the United States and in different regions of the world, kind of had the faith that, yes, we can make them as good as or possibly better than the best of France, which
and I love that.
Was for so long the pinnacle. So yes, we have those two bottles, and then I also have things like, well, your work with global cuisine. We've collected from restaurateurs in the DC area, Ethiopian restaurant and Chinese restaurants, and the stories that people bring with them, and the things that they bring, the coffee ceremony, and just the walks. I mean, these are emblematic objects that really connect us to big changes in, how and what we eat in the United States. So lots of different kinds of objects. And I'm just going to finish with one.
No, you tell us.
Well, this is what happens when you ask a curator.
No, but this podcast has no limit of time. You tell us what you want, and that's the key of this.
Okay. The section of the exhibits on back to the land movements, as well as school gardens. So Alice Waters' Edible Schoolyard, Malik Yakini's Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. We have tools and garden signs made by kids, trowels used by kids in these gardens. And that, to me, is a really important story to, again, emphasize. So.
That will always, and we went to Detroit, and we actually went into a school garden when we were there. So that was really fascinating for us. And I'm just going to finish these questions, and then I hope that I always call them fun questions, but that's, I'm hoping that the rest won't be unfun for you. But first of all, could you tell us more about the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts? Because, I know about it, but I don't think a lot of the people at home will necessarily know about it. So please tell us about that and how exciting that is and how, thoughtful it can be.
Sure, happy to. Yes, the foundation was created by Julia in 1995 and began operating in 2004. Its mission is to honor and further Julia's legacy, which is a noble mission. It's a nonprofit that makes grants to support culinary history research, scholarships for culinary training, food writing, and the like. In 2015, the foundation created the Julia Child Award, which is an annual award honoring an individual or group who has made a significant difference in the way Americans cook, eat, and drink. The award has traditionally been presented at a gala at the National Museum of American History, and it's been my honor to work with the foundation and the award recipients over the past decade. We've done it for 10 years now. The Smithsonian's Food History Project and the foundation are partners on this book that has been published. That was published last year as well.
Oh, and finally, on the kind of questions on this, why now did you think? Because it's nearly 20 years since she passed away. Is this? And I mention this again because we talked about it earlier. Is it because at some point she's going to become, a point in history and people look back, and you wanted this book to be out there, rather than, the wonderful person who I always watch her on television now. Whenever she's on, I just stay there and it's all play. So what do you think? Why did you decide to write it kind of now?
Yeah, I've worked with the kitchen for 24 years now, and I finally have something to say. No, but working with it for so many years and interacting with so many members of the public about the kitchen and Julia's legacy, it seemed like the thing to do, to tell the story in detail, to address questions people have been asking me for 2 decades, to make a book that is so beautiful that even if you don't think you care about Julia or culinary history, you'll find something that catches your eye and interest in the book. This is just a way of taking what I've learned about Julia and the kitchen by doing the research, but also from hearing the things that people really are interested in knowing about, who come to visit the museum, and putting that together in 2, covers and making it available for people. I think that there's a certain sadness in knowing that Julia is no longer with us.
Yeah.
But her story, as told through her favorite room in the house, the heart and soul of her home and the place that supported her long and wonderful career, that it lives on in these pages.
That's fantastic. And I will tell all the listeners to this show, of which we have many, it is the most fantastic book, and it covers everything because you get the passion of Julia Child, but you also get her obsession with getting all the stuff together. It's fantastic. But now we're going to do. I can see you getting worried. Now, what we're going to do is, like I said, I hope the last questions before haven't been bad questions, but I always call them fun questions. But what I thought I'd do this time is to have you answer as yourself for the question, and because I honestly think you're the closest to Julia that I've ever had on the show so far, or probably Jacques Pepin. So I'm going to ask you these questions, so one for you, one for Julia, for the 3 questions, and then in the end you can tell us about social media sites and all of that.
Okay.
So, if you were a meal, so if you, Paula Johnson, was a meal, what would it be? Anything. It could be anything.
All right. Well, Simon, I think it would have to be a dish that reflects my dual loyalties to my home state of Minnesota and my adopted state of Maryland. And what could it be but wild rice and oysters? Ooh. I have a recipe that combines wild rice and oysters, little shallots, butter, celery, and the surprise ingredient is cardamom. Oh, it's delicious. Yeah. And a little cheese on top.
Unfortunately, I can't eat oysters anymore.
Sorry about that.
Oh, but it still sounds fantastic. Maybe I could put mussels instead. But we'll have to think about it because I can eat other shellfish.
Okay.
But that sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So that would have to be it.
Okay. And if Julia was a meal, what do you think she would be? Because she would, I don't know what she would choose.
I don't know either, and I can only guess. Let me think.
Yeah, no, you just have to guess.
Okay. French onion soup and baguette, or hamburger and corn chips.
So
or
I have a French onion soup recipe on my website. So if anyone's watching, they should need to go and follow that one as well, because I think that's pretty close to what Julia Child would be. Okay, if you had to go back in any time to any meal, what would that be? This is you, I'm asking.
well, I from my own experience, I think it would have to be 1990s Astoria, Oregon, on the Columbia River. My friends and I, something you probably don't know is that I have done a lot of work in maritime history. And so I've done a lot of
Okay.
fisheries work. But friends and I were doing some work and walking along the waterfront, and a fishing boat had just come in, and the captain gave us just the most beautiful wild Chinook salmon fillet that we have ever seen. It was, yeah.
Oh,
We took it to their house and made a fire and cooked it over an open hearth fire. And it was it was just insanely delicious, especially with
I can
a
hear you
beautiful glass
describing
of,
it. It sounds great.
of an Oregon Pinot Noir. Oh my gosh. I still kind of think about all of the oil, just kind of that beautiful fish. Anyway,
I had some Oregon Pinot Noir this weekend when I was in Portland, and I love that because it's a lot fruitier. Oh, it's so good. Anyway, if Julia had to go back in time to any meal, where would it be?
this is the easiest question ever because we all know about the epiphany that she had in 1948 when she first arrived in France, in Rouen, particularly on their way to Paris. She's virtually right off the boat, the SS America, which she had taken from the United States to her new adventure in Paris, where Paul was going to be the cultural attaché at the embassy. But she writes about how the meal of oysters, sole meunier,
Oh,
green salad with vinaigrette, a real baguette, fromage blanc, strong dark coffee, all with a crisp white from the Loire Valley. This she writes about in her book, My Life in France, which she wrote with her grandnephew, Alex Prudhomme. And this meal, it just awakened something in her. You know, she was already just, here she was in Paris, in love with this, marvelous, marvelous man, Paul Child, in this gorgeous place, having this amazing meal that just altered her world. That would absolutely have to be the meal that she would want to go back to.
oh, that sounds so special. And I know when I read about that, it made my mouth
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
Okay, last question of this.
Okay.
So if you had to go back in time to see the invention of anything, what would it be?
Well, I have to say that, I like things as well as stories about people. And so I can't separate an invention from an inventor. It's just the way my mind
Which is
works.
great. You could name the inventor and you could name.
So I guess I'm combining an invention, an inventor, and the food world. I'm going to stick in the food world. And so I guess I would go with the bread slicer, the commercial bread slicer.
Oh,
Because the first bread slicing machine was invented by a chap named Otto Roeder in 1928. And it is one of the objects in the museum's collections for which I am responsible. At the moment, it is on display in Chillicothe, Missouri. But this machine transformed American bakeries. It was incredibly important. And it's so, it's just so, I don't know, it seems so simple. And I would just like to be in Otto Roeder's workshop when he was figuring this out.
that
So
sounds
there.
Okay, that is a great answer, and I think I've written about him when I was doing something on bread. I can't remember, but anyway. And if Julia had to go back in time anywhere in history to somewhere really fantastic, and she just wanted to see something fantastic being created, maybe not the microwave. Perhaps, what do you think? And I know you're only guessing, but I think it's fun.
Yeah, this is a guess, but I think if she could be at the birth of French cuisine, she would be a very happy person. I think that she, whenever that would be, however it looked, I don't know. But if she.
What about when the mother sauces came out, when Carême started cooking them and they went from what do you call it, from French style to Russian style with the 3 courses and all of that?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that would be a good?
I think that if French cuisine was involved, that she would, and there was a change happening, she would be very, very interested in that.
So perhaps we could say that if she wanted to be in the kitchen when Carême was creating the mother sauces, that would be
that could work. That could work.
Okay, that sounds fantastic.
Okay.
Well, finally, we're just going to talk about, Julia Child's social media sites, the Smithsonian social media sites, and if you could just name those, that would be fantastic. And because I think people who listen to this really want to find that out, and we'll show the book, and we'll show this on everything, and so anything you can do to get people to the Smithsonian and to Julia Child, I think would be great.
Mm-hmm. So the National Museum of American History's website is americanhistory.si.edu. SI as in Smithsonian Institution. Facebook is American History, facebook.com/American History, instagram.com/amhistorymuseum. So those are the main 3. The Julia Child Foundation is Instagram.com/Julia Child Foundation, one word. And let's see, Facebook.com/Julia Child is very, very easy. Those sites are.
Fantastic. Well, I want to say, and this has been just the most fantastic conversation, and I've just loved every bit of it, because you've talked about yourself, you've talked about how the kitchen moved to the museum, you've talked about Julia Child herself and everything about her, and you've talked about the Julia Child Foundation for Gastronomy and the Culinary Arts. So I think we've covered everything that we wanted to cover about it. And I just want to say a really, really, really great thank you to you. This has been fantastic. It really
Thank you, Simon. I have so enjoyed speaking with you about this, and I welcome you and all of the listeners to come visit us at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, 1300 Constitution Avenue, Northwest Washington, D.C.
I have always had such a great time whenever I have been, whether it's in the culinary side, or even when I walked around and I saw, the shoes from what do you call it, Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz. Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much fantastic stuff in that museum. Make sure, if you get time, go to DC, and please, please, please go and see all these museums. They're just fantastic. They really are.
Thanks, Simon.
Make sure to check out the websites associated with this podcast at www.eatmyglobe.com, where we will be posting the transcripts from each episode, along with all the references and resources we used putting the episodes together, in case you want to delve deeper into each subject. There is also a contact button, so please do let us know if there are any subjects that you would like us to cover. And if you like what you hear, please don't forget to join us on Patreon. Subscribe, recommend us to your family and friends, and give us a good rating on your favourite podcast provider. Thank you, and goodbye from me, Simon Majumdar. We'll speak to you soon on the next episode of Eat My Globe. Things you didn't know about food. The Eat My Globe podcast is a production of It's Not Much, But It's Ours and Producer Girl Productions. We would also like to thank Sybil Villanueva for all of her help, both with the editing of the transcripts and essential help with the research.